Hello, my name is Susan Millions and I'm with the Interact Design Group. In this video, I'm going to share a quick and easy framework for putting a host of problems in context. You may be working in classrooms or at the school level or even at the district level or maybe even at the state level, and chances are you're trying to solve all kinds of problems, from simple to complex. And today we're going to talk about how all problems are not created equal, and that we may need to put them in their proper context and then from there know that they're not all going to be solved the same way either. So hopefully at the end of today, the tool that I'm going to share will help you make more appropriate and effective decisions for how you might proceed in solution design. Most problem solving in schools now is done by data analysis, and generally we categorize data. Many of us use a matrix like the one you see here. One example of this, if you have never used a matrix like this, is the grouping worksheets from DIBELS, where we take student data and we categorize it so that we can group our kids, and then we can apply best practices based on what domain their performance occupies. This matrix is a handy tool if you need to categorize data so that you can use it. This matrix works well when you know how you're going to respond in each domain. When you run into problems where you don't have best practices or you don't know exactly how you would respond in each domain, there's no precedent maybe for what needs to be done, then we may need a different way of putting these problems in context so that we know how to solve them. The framework I'm going to share today is based on Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework, and the framework is used in project management, software design, and other design projects throughout the world. We've adapted it to our work in education, and our clients use it to design professional learning. So Cynefin is a Welsh word, pronounced as I'm saying, Cynefin, and it literally means a place or a habitat. And in full, it means the place of my multiple belongings. So it includes everything about what I'm doing. So in our systems, we have assessments and we have initiatives and we have beliefs and we have people who are coming from all different backgrounds and experience, and we have our own different backgrounds and experience, and so it's really, really hard to capture all of those variables simultaneously, and Cynefin is a tool to actually help us get to as much of that reality as we can and respond appropriately. Cynefin is not a categorization tool like the matrix, though. It doesn't categorize data, it makes sense of things. The two major differences between Cynefin and the matrix: first, in the matrix, the data precedes the framework. So we put a framework on the table and then we sort the data into the different places where it belongs in the framework. In Cynefin, the data actually precedes the framework. So we collect the data and then we find patterns and trends that emerge from the data, and then from there we kind of determine which context that pattern seems to match in the framework. So Cynefin is really suited to exploration. It really isn't for making use of data. It tells us what the big picture is so that we can begin to dissolve problems. The second thing that makes Cynefin different from the matrix is that Cynefin doesn't have any judgment calls about where it's best to be. So we're not looking for, let's all get everybody in the high category. The only value statement that Cynefin makes is to try to avoid the space in the middle, which is disorder. We'll talk about that later in this video. But other than that, Cynefin merely describes the environment of a given problem and gives us some clues about how we might respond. So the educational organization, like any sociocultural organization, consists of three basic systems. First, we have our ordered systems, and in education, the ordered system most closely describes the classroom, where there's an adult leader pretty much in control, we hope, and there's routines, and we're dealing really with individual performance problems, either student performance, teacher performance, or we're trying to improve content somehow. Complex systems involve the work of leadership, teamwork, and strategy. These are generally problems that need to be solved by building level, school improvement teams, vertical teams. Chaotic systems call for immediate action. We need to do something, anything, differently, right now. So most schools and districts don't face chaos very often. They're not in the chaotic environment. Exceptions to that would be if something from the outside turns the system on its ear. Maybe you're facing a state takeover, for example, or maybe a hurricane is coming. These are examples of chaotic problems. So as we are exploring the Cynefin framework, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about how each context applies to education specifically and give you some examples. So when we're facing simple learner-centered problems, the cause and effects are self-evident. So for example, a child can't spell because he has not mastered letter-to-sound correspondences, or a teacher is not delivering a program effectively because she's never received the training, or the content hasn't been mastered because the task was inappropriate. Most of us know how to solve these simple learner-centered problems, and we can sense what is happening through assessment or observation. We can categorize, analyze, group the data, and then respond with best practices. Now I'm hearing more and more there's talk of abandoning best practices, and I think we have to be really careful about that. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater as we walk into the 21st century. We didn't do all this research and best practices for the past, 15 or 20 years for nothing, and best practices is exactly what you want to use when you're facing simple learner-centered problems. The next domain is complicated instructional problems, and with complicated instructional problems, the cause and effect relationships are not quite so self-evident. We require some data analysis to kind of get to the root causes of why something's happening. We may need to call in some experts or some exemplary performers to help us solve them. It is really, really dangerous, however, to expect people to conform to a one-size-fits-all solution to complicated instructional problems. Leaders in education make this, it's a mistake of oversimplification quite often, and we need to be really careful because what winds up happening is we just make people mad. In addition, we tend to dig in and create compliance tools like fidelity checklists or scripted program implementation, and the reality is that in complicated environments, there are multiple good solutions that can solve the problem, and we really don't have to insist on a one-size-fits-all application or implementation. In the complex domain, we can only determine cause and effect in hindsight. The people and things in the system keep making moves that keep making the system change, which make it very unpredictable. It's almost as if you're walking through a maze and every step you take moves the walls, and everybody else is in the maze too. So there's complexity there that makes the system very unpredictable. The only way to get a handle on this is to conduct some safe-fail experiments. Safe-fail experiments are really hard for people, especially in education, because the value of being right and doing things right is so high. There's no such thing, though, as fail-safe design, and design is what's called for here, because design, by its very nature, is experimental. The key to management in the complex domain is how you strategize around experimenting, making sure that the process times are short so that we can learn quickly, but also how are we going to replicate and amplify experiments that work well, and how are we going to kind of dampen and squelch the ones that don't work so well. And again, in the chaotic domain, it's usually we're faced with some kind of an emergency situation. We may be entering that chaotic environment deliberately so that we can renovate it, or we may, like in the case of a natural disaster, have to rush in and do something to stabilize the environment right away. Most of us have processes in place for that, hopefully. More often than not, we're addressing multiple problems in multiple domains simultaneously. So for example, in solving a simple learner-centered problem, like let's say fluency in second grade, for example, We may identify that the problem is rooted in instructional practices that are a trend across the grade level. So we may need to go ahead and implement an improvement process like peer coaching or instructional rounds. So the decision to do that, however, requires another interaction, increasing the complexity of the problem, which means, we may have to go to an administrator and get buy-in so that we can build capacity. We might need additional resources like substitutes and time. All of that, makes a seemingly simple solution of, dealing with fluency for second graders, it becomes a building-wide concern. So what's nice about Cynefin is that we can identify who should be solving which problems, using which strategies, and why, and we can also do multi-level problem solving that makes sense for everybody. Which brings us to the mess in the middle, which is disorder. And we are in disorder when we don't know the problem context we're occupying. Unfortunately, this is where most of us live most of the time. Not just in education, in most organizations. So because we don't really know the context of the problem, we tend to interpret the problem based on our personal preferences or our position, what we're oriented to look for. It brings back the old adage, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So an educational example would be, if you're a member of the bureaucracy, let's say you're in the central office or you're in the State Department, you're a process person. So you generally will look at every problem as a problem of process and try to improve processes. If you have expertise in a certain area, let's say you're a reading specialist or an instructional coach, you'll tend to see every problem as a lack of resources and support for data analysis. If you're a principal and you're managing a new initiative in your building, you may think that the best way to solve problems is to gather a bunch of people together and hear lots of different points of view and then hope somebody comes up with good solutions. What we love about Cynefin is it gives us and it gives our clients a quick and easy way to recognize not only the problem context, but who should solve it and who should be doing which part simultaneously. Should we call in a subject matter expert? Should we bring in outside help? Can we solve this on our own? Do we need to create an inquiry, do data analysis? So all of these options become a lot clearer choices once we understand the contextual environment of the problem. One last but really important point I want to make before closing today is that there's a difference between the system boundary between the chaotic and simple domains and all the other domains. And at the Harvard Business School, they actually refer to this as the cliff. This happens when we treat all problems as if they are simple. And this is another mistake that educational leaders make a lot. We look for technical solutions if we just buy this program, or if we just put this assessment in place, or if we just train our people in this particular strategy, it's going to solve the issue. We look for a lot of silver bullets sometimes because, we're worried about these kiddos and we have to do something fast. So we tend to look for these silver bullets, but many times they wind up being blanks and they don't really get us where we want to go. So, dumping everything into the technical simple domain and managing from that place tends to throw the system in chaos faster than anything else. The only way to keep the organization out of that chaotic domain is by really being mindful, paying attention to good learning designs for the long run, and managing from that complicated and complex domain most of the time. Once we fall into chaos, it can be really difficult and expensive to climb out of there, so we want to avoid that as much as we can. So I hope that what I've done today is describe a quick and easy framework to recognize the different cause and effect relationships that characterize particular problems. In our next video, we will dig deeper into distinct decision-making approaches that are in the Cynefin framework and what are the practical steps of each approach. And then we'll give you some examples.